Welcome to Voice of the Nation. You are with me, Chanchai Wong. Now, politics has always been a very sensitive issue here in Thailand. We often heard people say that do not discuss politics with your friends, your family, or people you care about, or it might end up in a big argument and they might never want to talk to you again. Or if you ask children what they want to become when they grow up, we never heard children say that they want to become a politician when they grow up, as if becoming a politician is something to be ashamed of here in Thailand. Why is that? Today, we are going to talk to Kun Palit Wacharasintu, or Itim, Policy Campaign Manager of Move Forward Party. Welcome, Kun Itim, to our program. สวัสดีครับ
สวัสดีครับ Hi everyone.
Hi. First of all, let me ask you, what is your new responsibility and what it's like working with Move Forward Party?
Yeah, so I think actually I've only recently I guess announced my decision to join Move Forward Party and my new role as policy campaign manager. But actually over the past 2 or 3 years, I've been working informally with Move Forward Party on many projects already, especially the latest project to try and campaign for constitutional amendment and the drafting of a new constitution to replace the existing version, which we believe is undemocratic, both in its origins, its process, and its content. I've also been working informally with Move Forward Party in terms of giving advice and my perspective, especially on the education policies. Since over the past few years, I've been working in the education sector, managing an edtech startup. So actually, it's not like I've just only recently been working with Move Forward Party, but it's just that I've kind of completed my official transition from my previous role in managing a startup to a fully political one with Move Forward Party.
Okay, and you were with Democrat Party before, and it's the oldest political party in Thailand before, and now you are with Move Forward Party, which is a very new political party here in Thailand, only a few years old. Do you have to adapt yourself a lot moving from Democrat to Move Forward Party?
Well, so actually I left the Democrat Party quite a while ago. So I left the Democrat Party back in 2019, straight after the Democrat Party decided to go back on its electoral pledge to not support General Prayut and ended up joining the current coalition government led by General Prayut as Prime Minister and the Palang Pracharat Party. So I resigned as soon as that decision was made, I think over almost 3 years ago up to this date, so as soon as they joined, because firstly, I disagree with that decision because it was a decision that contradicted what they had promised with the electorate. And secondly, I also felt that decision reflected that the Democrat Party implicitly supported what Palang Pracharat and the military regime was doing in terms of extending and entrenching its powers via a constitution that they themselves had a big part in writing with rules that really put themselves at an advantage compared to other parties and not allowing for that to be kind of free and fair competition based on international democratic standards. So I left the Democrat Party quite a while ago based on those ideological grounds. And I think it's been a gradual process. I initially took a break from politics to go and manage a startup in education. And then 3 years on now, I've kind of joined the Move Forward Party. So in that sense, it's not necessarily like a big adaptation process. I think when you or whoever wants to work in politics, the main factor that they should use in terms of deciding which party they want to join is their ideology. So essentially, your picture of dream of your vision of Thailand or the picture of your dream Thailand, does that picture that picture, is it most similar to which party's version of your dream Thailand? I think that's the main decision, main factor that you should use in terms of deciding which party to join. And for me, right now it's I have a very similar picture of what Thailand should look like compared to Move Forward Party, and that was my decision to join.
Okay. Would you consider yourself a full-time politician?
I'm transitioning towards that. So in a month's time, yes, for sure. So I made my public announcement on the 30th of April at the party's general conference. So that was me transitioning from being, I guess, a full-time entrepreneur and part-time political activist campaigning on constitution towards a full-time political role.
Okay, and for Thailand politics, you are considered quite young. May I ask again, how old are you?
I'm 29. I'm not sure if I'm considered that young anymore because we're actually seeing more and more young people, people much younger than me, playing an even bigger part in Thai politics than I have been doing. So I think for me, age is less of an important factor in terms of deciding how much you can contribute to Thai politics. And in a way, this day and age where we are seeing changes happening at a very fast rate, we are seeing different generations having different sets of expertise which they can contribute to the country and to the world. And I think that's why we're seeing, not just in Thailand, but across other countries in the world, we're seeing young people stepping up, not just contributing as young people, but contributing as leaders of the country and having certain sets of expertise which they may have even more so than people in other generations. So I think in that sense, the development of any country, the development of this world requires a blend of people from all generations contributing what is their area of expertise, right? For example, you look across at countries like even like Malaysia a few years back had a minister of I believe a minister of youth and sports who was 26 years old at the time.
Yes.
And I think his youth and experience and expertise in technology helped him in terms of driving esports as an industry in Malaysia. So that's an example, which I think is an example of a young person using their expertise and their strength to push the country ahead.
Okay, and talking about politics and young people, some people, or I might say most people in Thailand think that politicians are very kind of sleazy and corrupted, something that they tell their children to stay away from because they say that politics is a very dirty thing and they can never be changed. And they say that honest people would never become a politician. But do you think that this is still true for Thailand today?
I think, firstly, I don't think that's a true statement. I think in all professions, whether it's politics, whether it's medicine, whether it's in academic, whether it's in any industry or any profession, there will always be good, honest people, and there will always be people who may be corrupt, right? So I think it's in every profession, there's a wide range of people. So I think it's unfair and inaccurate to paint a picture that all politicians are bad and corrupt. Right? I think that's number one. But secondly, I think that narrative is also unhelpful because if you want to tackle corruption in this country, I don't think the most sustainable way of tackling corruption is to try and paint a picture that someone is 100% good and someone else is 100% bad, and then do everything it takes to try and promote whoever you believe is 100% good to get into power. Because for me, you can never trust anyone 100%, and no one should trust any politician 100%. But the best way to tackle corruption is not to rely on individual morals or individual faith or faith in any particular person. But the way to tackle corruption is to design a system that is able to eliminate corrupt behavior, whether it's being performed or conducted by any single person, right? Whether it's making sure that our government is transparent, making sure that we move towards open data, and making sure that all public information, public data, how our tax money is being spent is open to the public, so that people can investigate and see for themselves and check if the tax money that they're paying is being used or being misused or not. Whether it's designing a system of checks and balances, whether by official bodies like National Anti-Corruption Commission to be fair and not interfered by any one political side, but is able to investigate all politicians and all officials across all sides of the political spectrum. I think that's the way we need to think about tackling corruption. It's not relying on any one good person or someone who you believe is good, who may not actually be as good as you think, but designing a good system to eliminate bad behavior and to make sure that all bad behavior is detected and those people take accountability or responsibility of their actions.
Yeah, I agree with you because it's about system, not just the people. And if we tell all the honest people to stay away from politics, this would make it even easier for bad politicians to corrupt it more. And so, what do you think are the problems for politics in Thailand that are holding the country back right now?
Yeah, so I think let me answer this both in a narrow setting and in a wider setting. So in a narrow setting or narrow sense of politics, right, I think we have to say that our current state of democracy has been in decline for the past 20 years. And the way I describe democracy in Thailand right now, I would use a picture of a tug of war game. So imagine a game of tug of war. On the one hand, you have what I call a regressive democratic system,
Okay.
or a system that is falling behind in terms of democratic standards. Right? I think the easiest way to compare different points in time is to use the constitution as a measure. Right? So we had a constitution back in 1997 or 2540, we use Buddhist calendar year, and compared to the current constitution, which was ratified in 2017 or in 2560, we can see that many elements are much less democratic in content. Right? We are seeing an expansion in the powers of many unelected bodies that have been designed to entrench and extend the powers of the current or of the military regime that originated from the military coup back in 2014. Right, we're seeing expansion of powers of the unelected Senate, all 250 of whom were appointed by the military regime, and they have large powers in terms of deciding who becomes prime minister. They have veto powers that enable them to block any constitutional amendment. They have the powers to vote for any laws related to national reform as well. We're also seeing the expansion of powers of the Constitutional Court and so-called independent organizations. And we're seeing an appointments process for the people sitting in those bodies, which are not neutral in nature, right? So whoever becomes like a justice in the Constitutional Court or becomes a committee member of these independent organizations have to be approved by those 250 military appointed Senate. So people are rightfully asking the question of how neutral these organizations can be. So these are just examples of a increasingly regressive democratic system. So that's on the one hand, right? But
Yes.
on the other hand, on the society front, I believe society is becoming more democratic in nature. People are becoming more aware and more supportive of pushing the country towards a fully democratic system, right? Whether it's not just calling for free and fair elections, it's not just calling for a new constitution which is democratic based on international standards, which is drafted at least by representatives who were elected by the people across the country, but they're also calling for democratic norms of liberty and equality to be embedded in all policy areas. So for example, if you go to the protests over the past few years, you will see that they're not just calling for reforms of institutions which they feel are undemocratic, but you're also seeing them calling for policies like conscription, which is in a way a policy to allow for, or calling for policies to abolish conscription, which is in a way a policy to allow for freedom for people to choose their own professions. Or you're seeing them calling out for policies like same-sex marriage, which ensures kind of gender equality and equal rights of everyone to marry who they love. So in that sense, society is becoming more aware and more supportive of these democratic norms. And you get a clash or a tug-of-war game between an increasingly regressive and backward political system or democratic system compared to an increasingly progressive society.
Okay, and how do we create this democratic society? Because I think for a society to become democratic, people need to be fully open for discussion on sensitive or difficult issue. Do you think that Thai society is open for such discussion?
I think we have to make it open for such discussion, right? So I think when we talk about what makes kind of a full democracy, I think there are many elements. I think firstly, probably the most fundamental is to ensure that we have free and fair election, right? And election respect each person's vote equally. But we're seeing right now that the most important election in terms of who becomes prime minister currently does not even respect that one person, one vote principle. Because currently Article 272 of the current constitution allows for the 250 military appointed senators to also have a vote in who becomes prime minister alongside the 500 elected MPs. I actually did the math on this, and if you were to calculate this, you will realize that one appointed senator has an equal amount of say in terms of who becomes prime minister as 70,000 voters combined, right? Or even if you look at a broader picture, 250 military appointed senators have an equal say, or have an equal say in who becomes prime minister as about 17 million or 18 million voters combined. So I think that's number one. Fundamentally, you have to make sure that elections are free and fair, respect one person, one vote first. That's number one. Number two is I think then you need to go just beyond free and fair elections, but also ensure that all institutions, all political institutions are reformed in such a way as to adhere to democratic standards, right? So for example, the most, I guess the rule of thumb for determining whether a certain institution is democratic or not is to compare the power that institution has and the democratic origins of its members, right? And I think the biggest mismatch you will see is an institution like the Senate, right? Because right now the Senate has huge powers, right? As I already mentioned, power to vote on prime minister, power to block constitutional amendment, but its origins is very regressive or very low in terms of democratic origin because none of them are elected. And if you look across across other countries in the world, you will see that this rule of thumb holds, right? For example, in countries like the US, the Senate has a lot of power, but of course they only have a lot of power because they are elected, and therefore they have that democratic mandate to have a lot of power. Or if you look at countries like the UK, sure, the upper house there, the House of Lords, are all appointed, but because they're all appointed, they cannot have that much power. The biggest power that the House of Lords in the UK can have is to delay legislation by, I believe, 1 year, right? So I think that's number two. So beyond free and fair elections, you need to also reform all public institutions, political institutions to be democratic, right? The third one is then the protection of people's civil rights and liberties, right? Whether it's kind of freedom, ensuring freedom of expression, which is under severe threat right now in Thailand, based on the many laws that exist, as well as the latest or the continuous crackdown on dissidents, including the use of the current emergency decree or Paragor Chukchern as one excuse for cracking down anti-government protesters as well. So ensuring that every person has their basic human rights and basic civil liberties protected is very important. Even the controversial Les Majeste or Article 112 is something that needs to be discussed as well, because we see that right now that law is very compared to similar laws in democratic countries that also are under the constitutional monarchy framework. We see that law currently has penalties that are much higher than similar laws you see in other countries. The 3 to 15 year imprisonment that the current law carries is much higher than what you see in other countries, and it's even in Thailand is as high as in unintentionally killing someone, right? So that also needs to be reformed in order to ensure that people's civil rights and liberties are protected. And then fourthly and finally, I'll touch on this issue as well, is the issue of decentralization, right? So of course, like the public is very excited about the latest Bangkok mayor election, right? But people are starting to ask the question, and rightfully so, as to why Bangkok is the only province in the country where the highest, I guess the highest level member of the executive is elected, whereas for the other provinces apart from Bangkok, the highest ranking official from the executive is appointed, because you have two heads, right? Theoretically, you have the mayors or the Puwa Rachakan Changwat, which are appointed by the Ministry of Interior, and then you have the Nayok Obajor, which I think the English name is like Chief Executive of the Provincial Administrative Organization, which is technically elected by the people in its own areas. But currently, the appointed mayor has much more power in determining the fate of the province compared to the Nayok Obajor. So that decentralization of power needs to happen, and we need to ensure that the highest ranking executive in each province is elected by its own people.
Okay, and that's why the open discussion is very important, so that people know the pros and cons of each issue. And I don't know if you ever heard about this before, but I often heard when I was growing up as a kid that do not discuss politics with your friends or people you care about, or you might end up in a big argument and they might never want to talk with you again. But may I ask you, do you discuss politics in your family or with your friends?
I mean, I do. And I think my view on this narrative, I mean, you asked me if I've heard of it. Of course, I've heard of it, right? I think every Thai person has heard of this almost as often as that previous narrative about all politicians being corrupt, right? And I think for me, my viewpoint on these two narratives are exactly the same. In the sense that I think both of these narratives, the first narrative of all politicians being corrupt, or this second narrative of, let's not discuss politics, especially amongst your friends and family, because you're going to get into an argument. I think they are very unhelpful narratives in terms of advancing democracy and ensuring free and fair discussion, right? Because in a country with 17 million people, it is impossible for everyone to have the same view, right? Even identical twins probably have very different views on many issues. So the aim of any country should not be to limit discussion and to somehow try and find a way for everyone to think exactly the same. That's not like what a society in harmony looks like, right? But a society in harmony is a society that is able to manage differences of opinion in a peaceful and fair way, right? And I think that's essentially why democracy was invented. It's a way to ensure that all decision making or all decisions that are made in such a way as to try and encapsulate different viewpoints across that one particular issue and arrive at a consensus which may not satisfy everyone, but which is acceptable by everyone, because everyone has been able to freely express their opinion, and there has been a voting process or democratic process along the way that ensures that all viewpoints are respected and eventually decided in such a way that every vote and every person's voice matters equally. So the aim of democracy or society is not to force everyone or find a way for everyone to think the same or to prevent people from speaking when they think differently. But it's more about ensuring how do we create a safe space and a safe environment for everyone to be able to feel that they can express their viewpoint freely, and then finding a process to ensure that the decision making encapsulates and incorporates all points of view in a fair and equal manner.
Okay, because I think that for some people the problem is that they think that if you don't think like me or if you not agree with me, then you think that I am wrong and then you are right. But actually, that's not the case. It's just like we just have different opinion, and nobody is right and wrong.
I mean, I actually learn a lot from people who disagree with me. I might even go as far as to say that I probably learn more from people who disagree with me than people who agree with me, right? Because if you find someone who happens to agree with you on that one particular issue, it's most likely that you will have very similar thinking and very similar views, which is fine. But when you find someone who views things differently or have an opinion that is different from you, then I tend to listen very closely to what they have to say. Because, for example, if they view something differently to me because they have a certain set of information which perhaps I did not know beforehand, then that may enable me to develop my point of view to become more complete and to encapsulate also their thinking and their set of information. Or if I discover that actually they believe that they view this issue differently to me because they misunderstand what I have been trying to express and communicate, then it allows me to explain to them what I'm actually thinking and maybe perhaps convince them that they actually agree with me and we actually share more common ground than what was initially believed. So in that sense, having a person who disagrees with you and criticizes you actually drives you to have a viewpoint that is more complete and also encourages a good dialogue between the two of you, which may end up with realizing that you share more common ground than you had previously thought.
Okay, actually that is a very good point that we actually learn a lot more from people who disagree with us than people who think about the same. And can I ask what inspired you to become a politician? Is it like a dream job or something you wanna always become since you were a little boy?
So I think I speak for all politicians, or I hope I speak for all politicians when I say that the main drive for someone in entering politics is that they feel frustrated or they feel that this country can be better than what it is today. The quality of life of the people in this country can be better than what it's like today. And I think that that's probably the main reason why a lot of people decide to enter politics, is to try and make this country better. Now, of course, two politicians may have a very different view of what a better Thailand should look like. And that's okay. In the end, I feel like each political party represents a certain ideology or represents a certain picture of Thailand, which they present to the people. And then the people during an election then chooses which version of Thailand they want to see and who do they trust in terms of delivering that better Thailand. So for me, that's essentially the crux of it. I mean, I enter politics because I believe that this country can be better. I see problems that have been around ever since I was young and it's not been solved yet. And I believe that I can contribute a small part in helping to solve that problem. Right? And I can list out the problems that we have right now, whether it's the political issue that I mentioned, that we are still regressing democratically, and that's why I've been pushing a lot for amending the constitution, drafting of a new version. But even beyond politics, we see other issues as well, right? I mean, on the economic front, we know that the growth rate or the economic growth of Thailand has been lagging behind other neighboring countries for quite a while. We are seeing our education system not being able to translate or not being able to design a curriculum that best fosters the skill sets that are required in the 21st century in this day and age, right? We're still seeing reforms in the civil service being slower than what it should be. We're still seeing too little decentralization of power to provinces and local governments across the country to be able to solve the local issues in their areas. And I think on the social front, we are also seeing higher and higher levels of inequality, right? Whether it's unequal quality in terms of the welfare services or public services people are getting in education, in healthcare. We are being faced with new types of inequality, which I think is becoming more severe, or at least people are seeing more of it during COVID, where there is this digital divide or disparity in the quality of life between those that are able to access the online world and those that are not able to access the internet and the online world. And we're also seeing human rights issues or certain human rights not being protected by our country at the moment as well. Right? So many issues to solve, and I think that's what is spurring me on to enter politics and to try and play a small part in solving some of these issues.
And my last question, which direction would you like to see Thai politics going in the future?
So I mean, if you ask me like, what that better version of Thailand in my viewpoint looks like, right? I think probably three aspects. I think the first one is I think we need to try and move towards a full or a better democracy, right? Both in terms of a democratic system, which is amending the constitution, ensuring all the political institutions are democratic and are responsive to people's needs and are accountable and are transparent. But it's also the democratic culture. How do we ensure that these norms of liberty and equality are present in all policy areas, and how these norms of democracy are fostered and developed and promoted even in our classrooms and our schools, right? So that's one. Number two, I think on the economic front, the key word that I think is very important to Thailand is competitiveness and competition, right? So how do we ensure that our economy is competitive compared to other countries? And I think for me, that requires what I mentioned about education reform, that requires reform of the public service, that requires us to really tackle corruption from a systematic point of view and not from a person-centric point of view. That requires decentralization of power to unlock that economic potential across the other provinces in Thailand and ensure that economic prosperity is not concentrated in just Bangkok or larger provinces, right? And then I think finally on the social front, if we do nothing, inequality is just going to get worse because technology is going to come in and lead to a lot of people becoming more unemployed and being displaced by technology, by automation. Our issue of aging society is going to affect people on lower incomes with lower amounts of savings than people with higher incomes and higher amounts of savings. Even things like climate change is going to affect people from lower income groups much more so than people from high income groups. So ensuring the country is well prepared to tackle that social inequality and ensuring we have or we can afford a welfare state, which we can if we allocate our budget wisely and systematically. I think that will be very important. So yeah, so a country that is democratic in the system and culture, a country that is competitive and a country competitive economically, and a country that is less socially unequal.
Thank you, Kun Etim, for talking with us today. And we wish you all the best for your political career and also for the better future of Thailand. Thank you. And that's all for Voice of the Nation today. Thank you for staying with us.